Hi everyone. We're going to begin reading 910 by Nora Raleigh Baskin today. And it's an interesting blend of both fiction and nonfiction. The characters you will meet in the story and their lives are fictional. They were invented by the author Nora Raleigh Baskin in order to explore the impact that this historical event had on people across the country. The backdrop, the events of 9/11, however, are researched and factually accurate. So this book presents to us really the best of both worlds in terms of being a fictional story with really accurate and detailed nonfiction information. It starts with a little note which is somewhat out of place. There's no character to this. It's almost an outside narrator sharing this observation. But it is an interesting observation that foreshadows what's going to happen later in the book. Let's take a read. Everyone will mention the same thing, and if they don't, when you ask them, they will remember. It was a perfect day. More than 8 million people lived in New York City that year, so of course not everyone's day started perfectly. There was excitement and pain, anxiety and boredom, love and loneliness, anger and joy. But everyone who looked up that morning must have marveled, whether noting it out loud or not. What a perfect day. So that is a bit interesting because for, a day that we know historically was a time of a tragic event, for the weather to be perfect, it's the opposite of what we expect. And so for that reason, we consider that irony. In addition, we have a vocabulary word right here, marveled, which tells you that people were surprised by how gorgeous and beautiful the weather was that day. The sky was robin's egg blue. There were one or two fluffy, almost decorative clouds. It was late summer warm, so the air was still and clear, but not the least bit humid. Warm the exact way you would set the temperature of the earth if you could. Clear with just enough breeze so you knew you were outside breathing fresh air. People would remember that day with all sorts of adjectives. Serene, lovely, cheerful, invigorating, peaceful, quiet, astounding, crystalline, blue, perfect. Until 8:46 a.m., when the first plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and nothing would ever be the same again. But that has not happened yet. So this sets the tone for the book, this idea that we are leading up to a tragedy, but we're not quite there yet. You may have also observed that we have some of our other vocabulary words right here in the beginning as adjectives that help capture the beauty of that day. Now, the next section we go into fits the format for what the rest of the book will do, because in the rest of the book, they're going to give us dates and times to follow. So our next section is 9/9. Okay, even though the book is titled 9/10, we're actually starting a day before that. And the first chapter gives us a time and a date and a setting. We are at the O'Hare International Airport, which is in Chicago. So this is our location, our setting, and our time. Because keep in mind that setting is both time and place. It was September 9th, 2001, raining in that Chicago slow drizzle sort of way. Outside the windows of O'Hare International Airport, the sky was painted a particular shade of gray and leaving droplets of water on the large glass windows that looked out onto the airstrip. Sergio and another boy from New York were at the gate, early for their flight home. Their university escort was sitting, eyes closed, listening to her disc man, waiting for the boys to board so she could go home. So this is our first introduction to a named character, and that's Sergio. Sergio is from New York, and he's in Chicago waiting to fly home. The other thing that's going to be interesting as we read through this book together is you're going to notice some terms that maybe are antiquated for you. They don't exist anymore, so they may not make sense. If you've never heard of a Discman, that's simply a iPod before iPods. It played CDs and it had headphones. And so that was your way of listening to your own personal music at this time. What was the other boy's name? Sergio couldn't remember. L something or M something. For 2 days, Sergio had recognized him as simply the white boy with the red hair. Let's go see what's in the candy shop. The red-headed boy pointed to the newsstand, which was filled with everything anyone could possibly think of needing before getting onto a plane. Newspapers, magazines, headrests, paperback novels, earphones, small suitcases, cold drinks, and lots of candy. Sergio glanced over at the escort, who didn't look up. She didn't even open her eyes. Okay, Sergio said. He took one more glance around to make sure they could find their way back to the gate. Everything in the airport appeared the same. Every corner, every window, every set of plastic seats, every gate. It would be easy to get lost. Sergio made sure he would not. Then he checked the information on the board again. Flight 563, JFK. On time, gate 10. So this gives us more detailed information. He's flying into John F. Kennedy Airport, which is in New York City. His grandmother would be getting up right about now. It was Sunday, her one day to sleep in. But she was probably up already making coffee, knowing Sergio would be home in a few hours. Sergio didn't realize how homesick he was. He had been the whole time, until just then, when he started thinking about his grandmother. It was the first time he had ever been away from home. And he'd only agreed to go at all because his grandma was so proud of him. 5 kids from New York State had been chosen to be honored at this ceremony at the University of Chicago, all based on one math test they had taken at the end of last year. And for that, Sergio had been flown to Chicago, put up in a hotel, and given 3 meals a day. And when they had called his name, his full name, Sergio Kincaid Williams, he had walked across the gigantic stage of the Court Theater and received his plaque, which was now weighing down his carry-on bag as he perused the newsstand. So our character's full name is right here, Sergio Kincaid Williams. Kincaid was his father's last name. Of his father, that was pretty much all he wanted to know. You getting anything to eat? The redhead boy asked when they got to the checkout line. Sergio slipped his hand into his jeans pocket to feel the $20 bill his grandmother had given to him 3 days ago. He didn't want to break it if he didn't have to. Don't they give us lunch or breakfast or something on the plane? Yeah, but they won't give us Kit Kat bars. The boy with the red hair put 2 candy bars on the counter. Sergio shook his head. Nah, I'm good. They finished checking out, and the boy handed Sergio one of the Kit Kats. I hate to eat alone, he said. Thanks. Sergio took the candy. He wasn't expecting that. It was nice. The red-headed boy began to unwrap his candy, then stopped. He appeared to be more interested in something across the store. That is so weird, isn't it? He said. He pointed. What's she got on her head? Sergio tried to figure out what the boy was talking about, but didn't see anything. What's weird? Who? Her. The boy gestured across the news shop to a girl with her back toward them, facing a full wall of magazines. She was wearing regular clothes, jeans and a sweater, but her head was wrapped in a shawl, a thin brown veil. Sergio knew what that meant. She was Muslim. There were a lot of Muslim girls in his neighborhood and in his school. But this kid had probably never seen anyone dressed like that. He was from way upstate New York somewhere. At that moment, the girl turned toward them, as if she had heard them talking. Her headscarf completely covered her face and neck, all the way down to her shoulders. Like a child's drawing, her pale face was floating in a sea of brown fabric. Her lips pressed together, her brow furrowed. Her eyes were blue, like the Mediterranean Sea. "Hey, man, let's go," Sergio said. It was so not cool to stare. So we're going to pause here because this is the first section of our story that takes a look at a character named Sergio. Now, we've learned about Sergio a few things that we can make some inferences based upon. For instance, when he talks about his grandmother, he talks about the fact that she would be getting up right now and it was her one day to sleep in. So what can we infer based upon that? She's busy. She works hard. She might not have any other day off. So that would imply that maybe she doesn't make a lot of money at what she does. Then, as we go down further, we learn that Sergio had been selected because of this wonderful score on this one math test. So what can we infer about Sergio based upon this? He's intelligent, at least in math. And we also learn that this was a pretty big honor for him because the way he words this, that he was put up in a hotel and they fed him 3 meals a day. This was something that was unusual for him. And so he really looked at this as a huge honor. So he's humble. He's not somebody who expects prizes for what he does. This part, very interesting. Take a look at that and decide what you can infer. Well, this is someone who's being raised by his grandmother. We don't know anything about his mother, but we do know that he doesn't want to know anything about his father. So we can infer that he has a negative relationship with dad. When we look at the fact that he doesn't want to break a $20 bill, it helps to reinforce the earlier inference that maybe they don't have a lot of money and he didn't want to waste it on something like candy. And then we get an interesting turn where we meet another character before we actually see her ourselves. This is through Sergio's viewpoint that we meet our next character in the story. Our next character in the story is Muslim. She's a girl, and she does wear a hijab. The hijab is the traditional Muslim headdress that's worn as a sign of religious respect. He felt that she was really kind of pretty. If you look at this description, like a child's drawing, her pale face was floating in a sea of brown fabric. Her brow was furrowed, but her eyes were blue like the Mediterranean Sea. So that seems like she's, quite attractive, even though you can't really make out her entire face behind the hijab. Now, this next section is indicated by the dots, which tells us that we're switching characters. And our next character is that Muslim girl, Naheed. Let's read on. Naheed was used to it, being looked at. She was used to people asking if she was wearing a costume or saying, "I didn't know you were Arab. Can you belly dance? Do you believe in God? Do you really not eat for a month?" She wasn't Arab. She was Middle Eastern. Well, she was American, born 12 years ago in Columbus, Ohio, and she had never lived anywhere else. She had never once been to Iran, where her Persian mother and father had grown up. She couldn't belly dance either. But she was used to people staring as soon as she left her house, her neighborhood, her school, her friends, and was out in public, as she was here in O'Hare Airport, waiting for her uncle and aunt to arrive. Their flight hadn't come in yet. Naheed's family could have just waited outside for Uncle Iman and Aunt Judith to go through security and baggage. But her dad wanted to be right at the gate when his brother got off the plane. So they had gotten to the airport early, really early. They had already had snacks, gone to the bathroom, and wandered through all the gift shops, and Uncle Amon's plane was still not there. So this is kind of an interesting thing to note. Kind of like the Disc Man, we're looking for clues of an earlier kind of life. And these are people who are waiting at the gate. So that means that they were able to go all the way up to where the airplane boarded in order to wait for their loved ones, which is kind of unusual. So it's certainly not something we would see in today's world because security is so tight. But keeping that in mind, I want you, as we do read through the story, to make a mental note when we see these things that have changed, because I think it will help us to reflect on the changes that our world has undergone since this time. Why don't you get yourself a magazine? Naheed's father offered. One I would approve of, he quickly added. Naheed gazed at the display wall. There were hundreds of magazines, all with exciting, colorful covers, pretty girls, beautiful clothing, and lots of bear skin. But there wasn't one magazine on this wall her father would let her buy. The girls with their hair blowing freely all around their heads like someone had a huge fan right in their faces, their bare arms showing even though they were advertising winter fashions. Naheed knew it was immodest. So here's another vocabulary word to make note of. A girl does not need to flaunt her beauty to the world, her mother had told her many times. Real beauty is inside, and the right boy will see that. So we have another vocabulary word here. And an interesting message that real beauty is from inside. And so it really doesn't matter what your outside looks like. Naheed decided she didn't need anything after all. She turned to head back to her family, only now there were people everywhere, filling the news shop, heading in all directions, strolling, rushing, dragging children in bags. But nowhere did she see her mother's or her father's or her little sister's familiar face. Her father had been standing right there a minute ago, hadn't he? Naheed looked straight ahead in the direction she had just come from. Or was it that way? Or there? It all looked the same. There were faces everywhere, but no one she knew. Her heart started to pump more quickly, and she felt the heat filling up her body. A tiny band of sweat formed instantly across her forehead. How would she ever find them? She could feel tears springing into the corners of her eyes. There were people all around her. Too many people, too many faces. She didn't want to start crying, but it was about to happen anyway. She kept walking, looking down at the ground, hoping her feet would keep working even if her brain wasn't. In this way, she banged directly into something solid, unmoving and talking. Hey, watch where you're going. Naheed looked up. It was so weird. For a second, it seemed that a girl from one of those magazines had actually stepped out and was right here, right in front of her. Light brown hair, long and straight, carefully pulled away from her face and delicate neck. She had perfect skin and a perfect outfit. White t-shirt with some kind of logo, tucked into her belted jeans. Oh no, now look what happened, the girl said. The impact of the two bodies had sent the girl's bag spilling onto the floor. Chapstick, a water bottle, a Walkman, and a plastic change purse, unfortunately not quite tightly closed. So here again, we have a little bit of antiquated technology. A Walkman is a personal music device that plays cassette tapes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Now surely Naheed was going to cry. She began to bend down next to the girl to help her when she saw across the way her little sister Nori waving her arms. Here, here, Nori was saying. Naheed felt a wash of comfort pour over her. Her mind cleared, her heart slowed with relief, then sped back up with joy. She hadn't lost them. There was her family standing by the far window. The plane had arrived. Even Uncle Iman and Aunt Judith were a welcome sight. Naheed stopped trying to collect the girl's things. She stood up. Oh, never mind, the girl said, wisps of her hair now loose and falling into her eyes as she gathered her things from the floor. I got it. Sorry. Thanks, Naheed called back. Sorry. But her voice was absorbed into the airport terminal din. So that noise of that airport terminal made it so that Naheed's voice couldn't even carry to this person she had bumped into, which leads us to believe that Naheed might be kind of soft-spoken. The other things that are worth picking out here is that Naheed becomes very quickly overwhelmed when she feels she's lost her family. And it's interesting to note that for some people, that probably wouldn't affect them as much as it affects hers. We see here she has tears springing from the corner of her eyes. So what can we infer about her as a character? We might say that she's sheltered. We might say that her parents have protected her. I think those of you who have traveled frequently through airports are maybe used to the hustle and bustle. If you've never been through Chicago O'Hare Airport, it is built rather like a mall with airplane hangars attached. So it is very, very busy. And at this time, before security was tight, it would have been even more crowded. So it's definitely worth noting that Naheed is somebody who seems a little uncomfortable. She goes from feeling like she's being judged by Sergio and the redheaded boy to feeling like she is lost and in a panic. And then we end her section with her having this unfortunate run-in with a girl who she thinks is just absolutely gorgeous, but she doesn't have the self-confidence to speak loud enough for the girl to hear her. Now, again, we have these three little dots which indicate a break and a new character. And the new character should not surprise you. It is this girl who Naheed has just run into. So let's take a look at the description of her. She has light brown hair. She has a delicate neck. She has perfect skin. She has a perfect outfit. Okay? It's interesting that Naheed sees this character as so perfect, because once we meet her, I think we're going to come to understand that the way things appear on the outside aren't always consistent with the way people are feeling on the inside. Our next character is Amy. Amy grabbed for the loose coin that was standing upright and rolling across the floor, but it got away. She didn't feel like chasing it. She let her mind glaze over, watching the nickel or dime or quarter or whatever it was turn like a wheel to the left, to the right, and the left again, before it finally toppled over and a man's thick black shoes stepped right on it. Then he went on his way without noticing. "Amy, what are you doing on the floor?" her mother asked. "You know I'm in a rush." Amy knew that. Her mother needed to hurry to catch her flight. Amy and her dad were going to Los Angeles, but her mom, at the last minute, had to go to New York for a meeting. Her new job meant that last minute happened a lot. It meant nights and sometimes even weekends. And sometimes Amy just wished her mom's new job had never happened. "Do you have to go?" Amy could hear herself whining, but she couldn't help it. She was starting 7th grade tomorrow in a new school in a new town, and to make matters worse, a week later than everyone else because of the bat mitzvah. She might still have been whining about that, except her cousin's bat mitzvah had been so much fun. Amy's family had already sold their house, so for the weekend of the bat mitzvah, they got to stay in the Drake Hotel. Amy could have stayed down the hall with her other out-of-town cousins, all girls about her age, but she chose to stay with her parents, like she used to when she was little, and they would go away on vacation. If there were 2 queen-size beds in the room, she would make her parents sleep separately so that one night she could sleep with one and the next night the other. Her favorite vacation was when they went to Magic Kingdom in Orlando, and there was only one king bed. She slept right in the middle with her mother and father on either side of her. This time at the Drake Hotel, they ordered a rollaway brought to the room, but it felt nearly as good. After the bat mitzvah party, when they went back to their room, all the decorative pillows had been taken off the king bed, and the covers were turned down into a perfect triangle. Even her little rollaway had been folded down neatly, set up for her just to climb right in and go to sleep. There were 2 tiny wrapped chocolates on all of their pillows. Amy knew she was too old to want to be sleeping in the same room with her parents, but she couldn't help it. She hated it when her mother was about to leave on a business trip. But now, as her mother kissed her goodbye and left, Amy didn't say anything. She didn't want to start crying. She waved as she watched her mother getting farther and farther away. There was still time. She could run after her mother and stop her from leaving. In her mind, Amy played out the scene. She would catch up in a few seconds before her mother could turn around at the sound of Amy's sneakers. Amy would wrap her arms around her mother's waist and hold tight, really tight. They would stay that way for moments, hugging, not having to say anything, because there would be nothing to say. I love you, Mamala. I love you too, Amala. And then her mother wouldn't get on the plane. She'd stay home with Amy, and they'd bake cookies. Amy could still make it now, if she ran fast. She even felt the energy tingle in her toes. But she didn't run. And then poof, the moment was gone. And now there was a stranger, a woman with 2 little girls hiding behind their mother's legs, talking to Amy's dad. And there was a boy standing beside the mom, looking embarrassed, but protective. "Excuse me," the mother was saying. "Yes," Amy's father answered. "I'm sorry, but do you have the time?" "Of course." Amy's dad looked at his watch and told her the time. At the same time, he reached over and gave Amy a squeeze. He knew she needed it. The woman said, "Thank you," and she and her 3 kids headed off somewhere in a big hurry. When Amy looked back down the corridor, her mother was gone. So in this section, we learn that perfect-seeming Amy has a not-so-perfect situation going on. And what we've learned is that her mom has taken a new job, and Amy wishes that that job had never even happened. In part because it's a commitment of time that Amy used to have with her mom. And unfortunately, that gift of time has been taken away as her mom is now working on weekends and evenings and things like that. Very realistic idea, as we've all had these kind of situations pop up in our lives. Now, the part about the bat mitzvah, some of you might be familiar, and some of you may be having bat mitzvahs this year, but that is a celebration in the Jewish faith of a young girl becoming a woman. So there's a wonderful party usually and a fabulous ceremony. And so that is what Amy has missed a week of school in order to stay behind and celebrate. But it makes her uneasy because she's missing a week of school. She's starting later than the other kids, and she already feels like she doesn't fit in. Add to that the idea that her mom's not even going to be there to see her off on her first day at a new school. It really does show us that Amy's life may look, from the outsider's perspective, to be pretty nice. But from the inside, Amy feels like she wants to cry. So with that in mind, we move on to our next character. And again, it should be no surprise that when we pick our new character, we get this boy who is standing beside his mom, looking embarrassed but protective. And this boy is going to be our main character in our next section. Maybe it was the way the dad put his arm around the girl when he was looking at his watch. Or maybe it was how the girl kind of looked like Claire a little bit. They had the same hair color, and Claire wore hers that way too. She was about the same height. But maybe it was just the way the dad was being so attentive to his kid that Will noticed. He felt a tiny, sharp pain in his throat. So this boy's name is Will. And he seems to have some kind of jealousy or wistfulness at the dad and his interaction with Amy. "You didn't need to bother that man," Will said when they had walked past. "There's the time, Mom, right up on the check-in board." He pointed. I know, but I wanted to double check," his mother said, "just to make sure." Will and his 2 sisters, Rooney and Callie, followed their mother through the airport. He wished his mother didn't get so nervous. He really wished she didn't ask strangers for help all the time. And that had nothing to do with his dad dying or the way he got killed. Died or killed, Will wasn't sure, because he still didn't have the right words to explain his father's death, to make sense of any of it, to even think about it. So this would explain that feeling of wistfulness or jealousy, that idea that his dad has passed away. And we're going to get a lot more information about that in Will's section of the book. No, his mom had always been like that, talking to anyone, thinking that the universe took care of you as if all you had to do was ask nicely. She acted as if she really believed people in this world cared about other people and would actually stick their neck out just because she did that for other people, because that was the right thing to do, or because that's how their dad had always done things. Come on, kids. Will's mother was doing her speed walking thing through the terminal. We'll have to hurry. His trip to Florida hadn't been such a good idea all around. But what could they do? It had been given to them, everything, including tickets to Disney World, all paid for. A gift of healing from the town of Shanksville. A bunch of his parents' friends had decided the family needed to get away on the anniversary, if you could call it that. So I'm sure this name is ringing a bell. And if it's not, I want you to think back to our conversations about September 11th and Flight 93. This is Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Oops. Additionally, when he's talking about the anniversary, he's talking about the anniversary of the death of his father. So apparently his father had died the September before. The whole town practically had raised the money quietly and not so quietly through bake sales and donations and gifts. And so when they presented the trip to Will's mom, what could she say? No? No, thank you. My family and I don't want to have fun anymore. The lines at Disney World had been so long, the wait sometimes more than an hour, and it had been hot. Callie fell asleep, and their mother ended up carrying her through most of the Magic Kingdom. She looked like a limp doll, a sweaty, limp doll. Rooney cried after each ride because she wanted to go on again, and you couldn't do that. Life does not work that way, not even in the Magic Kingdom. The trip began to feel like a burden. It was a chore to be happy, even though sometimes, in spite of themselves, they were happy. Like when Callie jumped into the pool and made it all the way to the other side by herself. Or when the French waitress at Epcot brought them a dessert meant for another table, but told them they could keep it anyway. They took 4 spoons and dug in, not having any idea what it was. Dad would have loved this, Rooney said, scraping the last of the rich, creamy pudding from the bowl with her finger. Daddy loved cinnamon, their mother added, and they all got quiet again. By the end of the long weekend, they were all exhausted. They were 58 minutes early for their connecting flight home, Orlando to Chicago, now Chicago to Pittsburgh. The waiting area was practically empty. Will's sisters both laid their heads down on their mother's lap. Will pulled a watch out of his pocket. It wasn't one of those new cool watches that told the temperature and what time it was all over the world. It was just a plain Timex on an old, really worn yellow and blue striped band. But it had been his dad's watch. The only thing Will had specifically asked for. When Will was little, his dad used to let him wind it up, pulling out the tiny stem and turning the metal knob, careful never to overwind. Mindful as well, never to let it stop completely. Will held the watch in his hand and looked down at the white face, the black Roman numerals, and the skinny second hand ticking forward in a steady jerking beat. It was 10:03 exactly. So in this very last section, we learn about Will's family and their loss. And we also learn about the idea that Will has this sense of embarrassment about his mom wanting to trust other people, which leads us to infer that maybe Will doesn't trust other people. Does it have something to do with his father's death? Quite possibly. So we'll have to read on to find out more about that. Okay? Additionally, we learn about the kind of supportive community that Shanksville, Pennsylvania had, in that they purchased this gift for this family who suffered a tragic loss. Okay? And then ultimately, we're left with the idea of Will having this watch. And this watch was a plain old Timex that had to be wound, which is pretty old technology. Now, ultimately, that watch is something of a symbol. And what it symbolizes is that Will is now the protector of the family. If you remember, when Amy saw Will and his mother and his sisters, he said that Will stood next to the mother looking embarrassed but protective. So the watch is almost a symbol that Will is becoming the dad. And that happens in families. Sometimes when parents get divorced or there's an unfortunate loss, sometimes we grow up faster than we would otherwise, and we have to step in and take on a lot of responsibilities that maybe other people our age wouldn't. So that's something to keep in mind when we think about Will's character. Thank you for listening to this first section of the book. And as we read on, we're going to meet our characters more in depth. Each section will be given a setting, and with that setting, you'll be able to determine the character based on location. Our next section will be in New York with Sergio.